Upasama Prakarana, Chapter 3, The Story of Bali the Great. The clouds rumbled, the winds lashed at the trees, which were followed by a heavy downpour. The lightning struck, lighting up the heaven and earth. It was as if Indra, the god of rain, was eager to make up for the lost time. The river had turned earthen in color, carrying the mud from the mountains. She had gathered so much momentum as to uproot smaller trees who had unsuccessfully tried to resist her flow. As and when the rain's intensity increased, her force increased, and she wore a terrible look to frighten the people dwelling on her banks. This had happened with almost all the rivers on earth, and the suffering taught man to harness the power in water to his advantage. It is true that even today we have the phenomenon of floods in some of the rivers, but it has taught man that it is possible to harness any power, macro as well as micro. Ironically, as and when he is seemingly getting control over the external forces like water, wind, and nuclei of atoms, it appears he is losing control over his own inner forces like thought, emotions, and desires. In spite of the claims he is making over the new modes of education, it appears that all he has been able to do is to confuse himself with the load of increasing bulk of information instead of gaining more clarity. The science and technology, his proud creations, have become like the Frankenstein monster who tried to kill its own creator, as they have made man, at the most, into a civilized barbarian. For all he seems to be interested in is the sophistication of warfare, which he had managed with stones and other crude weapons in his caveman days. J. Krishnamurti said, "The scientific mind is precise and clear in its investigation, but it is not a compassionate mind, for it has not understood itself. The religious mind is capable of thinking precisely, not in terms of negative and positive. Therefore, that mind can hold within it the scientific mind. But the scientific mind does not contain the religious mind because it is based on time, on knowledge. It is rooted in success and achievement. The religious mind is the real revolutionary mind. It is not a reaction to what has been. The religious mind is the only mind that can respond totally to the present challenge and to all challenges at all times." One has to be careful not to confuse the religious mind mentioned by Krishnamurti to be that mind which is rooted in beliefs and rituals. He has very crisply clarified it as the mind that goes into itself. That is, the mind which is capable of observing its own activities. There is so much objectivity that one is able to observe even the observer. This has been called the Antarmukhata by Vedanta. Krishnamurti predicted that only these two, scientific and religious, minds could survive in future. But unless the scientific mind becomes a non-inclusive mind, it can and does create only Frankensteins to bring about an imminent destruction and catastrophe to the earth. And religious mind is an all-inclusive mind. He was hinting that for the good of mankind, it is very necessary, if not mandatory, to develop and nurture the religious mind. An incident from the life of a saint illustrates the readiness of the religious mind to respond to challenge. He was an old man, a sannyasin, visiting Jaipur, and was being seen off at the railway station by his devotees. Just when the train started moving, one of the devotees pressed a small bag into his hand. When the train picked up speed, the old sannyasini opened the bag to find it filled with currency notes. Being of childlike nature, he started counting them. It was a first-class compartment with only one other passenger, a young British lady. No one knows how the greed got better of her. But she said that if he did not hand over the bag, she would shout that he had tried to molest her. The Swamiji just looked at her blankly and made a sign that he was hard of hearing and she better put it in writing. The lady did just that. Taking the note in his hand, the Swami smilingly addressed the lady, "Now you can shout." Analyzing our actions, we find that most of them are only reactions to our own impressions, opinions, and obsessions about the situations or people, and seldom responses to the real situations and the people. This is because the mind is governed by the judgment and prejudices, forgetting that each situation and person is unique and is never a repetition. And the mind is necessarily so, as it can only function only as a receptor of external information, as an analyzer governed as well as colored by the memories of past experiences under the supervision of I. In this sense, most of us transact only with the image of the person and seldom to the person directly, as observed by J. Krishnamurti. How does one become a victim to such wrong notions? In his most popular and monumental Prakarana Grantha, the explanatory scripture entitled Viveka Chudamani, Acharya Shankara points out Maya, or the nescience, to be: Maya is also called the unmanifest and is the power of the Lord. It is without beginning, comprising of the three gunas, and is superior to its effects. It is to be inferred only by one who has a clear intellect from the effects it produces. It is this avidya which projects the entire universe. Avyaktanamni paramesha shaktihi anadya vidya trigunatmika para karyanumeya sudhiyaiva maya yaya jagat sarvamidam prasuyate. One of the powers of the ultimate reality is the power to delude itself. This has been called Maya and is of the nature of deep sleep, where one is in a state of I do not know, which falls under the influence of the three gunas, tamas, rajas, and sattva. The Acharya then goes on to describe the nature and effects of the three gunas. He describes tamas as Esha vrittirnama tamo gunasya shaktiryaya vastvavabhasate jnata saisha nidanam purushasya samsrite vikshepa shakte pravanasya hetuhu. Avriti, the veiling power, is the power of tamas, which makes things appear to be other than what they really are. It causes man's repeated births, initiating the action of vikshepa, the projecting power. Abhavana va vipirita bhavana, asambhavana viprati taptirasyaha, samsargayuktam navimanchati dhruvam, vikshepa shakti kshepa yatyanajasram. Absence of correct judgment or contrary judgment, lack of definite belief and doubt, these certainly never leave one who is under the influence of avriti. This, along with the vikshepa, gives endless trouble. Avarana, the veil, appears to be the causal problem, which in turns give way to vikshepa. The nature of tamas is bondage through ignorance. Man gets totally bound due to rajas. When the Acharya takes up the Rajoguna, he writes, Vikshepa Shakti Rajasa Kriyatmika Yattah Pravritti Prasrita Purani Ragadayosya Prabhavanti Nityam Dukkhadayo Ye Manaso Vikaraha. Rajas is Vikshepa Shakti, the projecting power. Activity is its nature. From it, the initial flow of activity has originated, and also the mental modifications such as attachment and grief are continuously produced. Desire, anger, greed, hypocrisy, arrogance, jealousy, egoism, envy, etc. are the dreadful attributes of rajas from which the worldly tendencies of man are produced. Rajas is therefore the cause of bondage in life. Since the nature of rajas is bondage through activity, it drives man under its influence to the tiresome activity characterized by egoism as well as egotism. A shloka from the Bhagavad Gita says, Yattu kamepsuna karma sa ahankarena va punah kriyate bahulayasam tadraja samudahritam. While the same work, the third guna sattva has been described by the Acharya as Sattvam vishuddham jalavat tathapi tabhyam militva saranaya kalpate yattatma bimbah pratibimbatah samprakasha yatyarkya ivakhilam jadam. The pure sattva is like clear water. Yet, in combination with rajas and tamas, it provides for the transmigration. But when the light of self gets reflected in sattva alone, then, like the sun, it lights up the entire world of matter. Manifestation of ahankara happens to be under the influence of three gunas. So it has all the characteristics mentioned by the Acharya. But avriti and vikshepa are really noteworthy in the sense that understanding them will help the seeker in learning to observe the mechanism of involvement as well. The first activity of the mind, or rather, the activity which creates the mind, is the act of constriction or the act of focusing. This is more or less in all activities of the mind. This constriction in turn limits the scope of understanding, not unlike the horse with blinkers on is capable of seeing only the front. The explanation of Adi Shankaracharya no doubt is very clear and exhaustive, but no one has explained the nature of three gunas so simply as Sri Ramakrishna had through his parable of three robbers. Sattva, no doubt, has the capacity to point out the truth. Still, it's a thief. Seeker has to overcome the influence of rajas and tamas, taking the help of sattva. As Vashishta says, the seeker to eliminate the impure vasanas with pure vasanas. And Acharya Shankara seems to suggest that one has to overcome the vikshepa and make the mind calm, and then one is able to allow the wisdom to dawn in her or his consciousness. Sage Vasishta told Rama that one has to eliminate all impurities of the mind like desires and fear to become a recipient of moksha. He said that if it's not possible to control the desires etc. directly, one can attain jnana through the path followed by Bali the Great, through his intelligence. He continued when Rama asked the sage to be enlightened about the nature of that course. There once lived a matchless Asura king by name Bali, reigning the Patala like an emperor. He made the whole world tremble with his prowess and was able to humiliate even the gods. Being the son of noble Virochana, he ruled for many years. One day, he ascended to the topmost story of his luxurious palace and reflected with disgust for the material pleasures of samsara. With all his so-called material achievements, the pleasure he had been deriving were not only momentary but repetitive. He wondered as to why even the intelligent persons do not get disgusted with them and are not ashamed to seek such enjoyments again and again, and to waste years and sometimes lives. With all the comforts of living, the quality of his life had not improved. He discovered that he was under the influence of restless action. Contemplating thus, he tried to seek that which is permanent and free from all illusion and activity. He was overwhelmed with joy as he remembered the conversation he had with his respected father, Virochana, at that very spot. On his request to remove his doubts, omniscient Virochana, the father, had replied by telling him a story. There is a beautiful country which is unlimited, all-pervading, and without any precincts. That is the source from which everything has arisen and into which everything gets absorbed. In this country, there exist neither the five elements, nor hills, nor forests, nor holy places, nor devas, nor any other ancient souls. The name of the king is Mahadyuti, the great effulgence, who is omniscient, all-pervading, and cause of all and perfectly quiescent and full. He is silence itself, and the actions happen around through the minister appointed by him. The moment minister thinks of a thing, though non-existent, it appears instantaneously. Though existent, it disappears mysteriously. This minister does not have the power to enjoy anything on his own, nor does he know anything by himself. Though he acts in presence of the king is always alone. On listening to the story, son Bali inquired the nature of the resplendent country without any mental disease and boundary, and the means of attaining it. He also wanted to know more about the king as well as the minister, and the method of conquering the minister. Father Virochana replied happily that the minister is almost invincible to any outside force and could only be controlled through the king. In order to dispel the doubts, Virochana proceeded to explain what the king, the minister, and the country symbolize. The country stands for incomparable and eternal moksha. The king is the Atmic reality, inseparable from moksha. His creation, the minister, typifies the mind. The mind can only be controlled skillfully through the development of complete vairagya, the divine disinterest, and asanga, non-attachment. Persons without any idea of the wisdom that is contained in the true jnana books maintain that our four parts into which they divide the actions of the mind or time, 2 parts are to be devoted to sensual objects, a quarter to a study of jnana books, and the remaining quarter to the worship of the blessed Acharya. But the partial knowers maintain that 2 quarters are to be devoted to the contemplation and worship the Acharya, a quarter to meditation upon the truth contained in the Jnana book, and the remaining to the actions of organs. Both these classes affirm that Jnana will prevail on such persons treading as they suggest, while the third class, who are full jnana, affirm that moksha is easily attained by those who devote the 4 parts to the 4 purposes of study of jnana books of akamata or desirelessness, of self-cognition and path of worship of acharyas. Saying thus, Virochana blessed his son Bali that he may attain moksha through intelligent subjugation of desires through Atma Vichara, as through subjugation of senses with Vairagya, Atma Vichara is induced, while Atma Vichara brings about the renunciation of desires. They are mutually dependent, like the full ocean and the clouds. Having earned wealth in proper ways, for looking after oneself and others without violating laws and observations of the country, one should, through the wealth, resort to the wise of rare sattva guna, and there attain vairagya, and thereby develop atmic inquiry. Bali was extremely happy to recollect the conversation he had with his respected father long time back, so he decided to act according to the advice of his father. Meditating upon himself, he started cogitating on the questions like, who am I? And what is my real nature? He reflected for a while and decided to invoke his Guru Shukracharya, who had cognized the reality, and inquire to act accordingly. Having closed his eyes, he meditated upon his Guru in true affection. Then Shukracharya, whose form was true Satchidananda Akasha, appeared before Bali. The king saluted, and having worshipped him, he laid bare his doubts. Shukracharya explained the king that all manifestations that we perceive, without any exception, are jnana only. All that is beyond our perception is again jnana only. That which is conditioned and that which is not is again jnana. The one who is asking the doubt, that is King Bali, and the one who is clarifying the doubt, Shukracharya, are jnana. The whole universe is nothing but jnana. This truth can be cognized when the mind is without any modifications. After initiating Bali thus, the Acharya withdrew. Listening to the potent advice of the Acharya, Bali fell into a state of deep vichara. With the mind directed inwards, it transcended the body, mind and intellect to behold the reality within. With that vision, he looked outside. He experienced that everything there is only a manifestation of the same reality. And then he really understood the words of Shukracharya. Remaining in that state for a while, he passed into Nirvikalpa Samadhi. While Bali was in this state, his courtiers in search of their king reached the topmost story of the palace. Finding him in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, they waited a long time for him to come to the normal state. When Bali finally did, he started performing his duty without any egoism or egotism. Having that pure vision, he was never disturbed in any adverse situation or amidst pleasure or pain. In spite of the unlimited armies of good and bad thoughts crossing his mind, he was established totally at the center, the primal cause of all. Concluding the story, the sage urged Rama to be established in reality and thus control the seemingly rebellious mind. Most of us are familiar with the story of charitable King Bali's large-heartedness, his readiness to give everything in charity, of Lord Vishnu appearing in the form of Vamana, the dwarf, and seeking 3 steps, of Vamana covering the entire earth with his first step, the entire heaven with his second step, of Bali taking the Lord's third step on his own head, and ultimately his going down to Patala or nether region. Vamana has been considered to be an avatara, the manifestation of the reality for saving the good and fighting the evil. Bali means sacrifice, as he is represented in the story, and sacrifice can generate a lot of power, as evident through his invincibility and control over even the gods. But when even this sacrifice or charity is done only for the sake of nurturing the ego, it does have adverse effects as like arrogance, pride and indulgence. This story only symbolizes that the ego is ever ready to raise its hood with any or every act. Someone becomes a victim to pride because he is powerful, someone else to anger, other to austerity, and maybe some other person for righteousness or even humility. This is because the ego gets strengthened by any activity which has the doership behind it. But then, there are times when every one of us, without exception, has to face the basic questions, when one is forced to accept that there is this repetitiveness in the world of objects, experience, thoughts and feelings. At such times, one remembers one's father. In Bali's case, it was Virochana, which means the sun, the moon, as well as the Agni, or in general, the light principle, which helps one to see, and in case of a seeker, it is Antarmukhata. It helps the seeker in gaining the ability to do vichara, while Shukracharya is the Guru principle in each one of us. He is considered to be the preceptor of Asuras, the demoniac forces, able to guide and control the evil forces. The greatest evil is avidya, the ignorance, avrati, the covering. Through vichara, the mind changes its direction. The Guru principle helps in knowing the all-pervasiveness of wisdom and to ultimately be in the state of Advaita, the no-otherness, which alone eliminates fear and all other evils. Even in the popular story, Bali's offering the earth and heaven to Vamana represents his transcending the gross body and subtle body respectively, while offering his head for the Lord to keep his foot symbolizes his transcending the ego for the achievement of quiescence. The 3 steps demanded by Vamana to Bali represent Shravana, listening, Smarana, remembrance, and Acharana, the practice. Sage Vasishta thus gives an indirect alternative for eliminating the desires and other fluctuations in the mind through this story. Here, the seeker is urged to observe the mind from the subtler level. The Bhagavad Gita describes the order of subtlety in the following shloka. Indriyani paranyahu indriyebhyah param manaha manasastu para buddhehe yo buddhe parasastu saha. The senses are subtler than the body. Manas is subtler than the senses. Buddhi is subtler than the manas. He, the Atman, is subtler than the buddhi. Consequently, we find that the senses can be controlled by the manas, which in turn can be controlled by buddhi, which can be controlled by the ahankara, which again can be controlled by self or the Atman. But one thing to be remembered is that one is able to go to the next subtler level only when the activity has slowed down at the grosser level, at least comparatively, which brings us back to the importance of developing vairagya. Floods in the rivers bring in destructions and spells havoc to the beings who come under its force. They inundate the villages in waters. They erode the soil and carry away the topsoil. But they also bring fresher soil from the mountains or from upstream. The floods are a great sight to the one who is on the hills watching. Similarly, the floods of desires, of lower appetites, of pride, of hurt, and other manifestations of ego sweeps away the common man under their influence. But for one who has constructed the dam of self-control, they become a source of power. And for one who has transcended them by being in the subtlest level of Advaita, they are natural spectacles like the lightning or the dark clouds carrying tons and tons of pure water, or of birds in graceful flight, which only evoke pure bliss and joy.